So today is July 6th, 2021. My name is Maria Saldana and I'm here with Bobby Sanchez. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so can you start by telling me when and where you were born?
I was born in New York, in Lenape land. And I was born, I guess, in Long Beach, Long Island. And then I moved to New Rochelle when I was like 4 years old in New York. So that's where I lived pretty much my whole life.
Okay, cool. And when were you born?
I was born in March 1995 on the first day of spring.
Nice. I'm born on the first day of spring in Peru, so how the seasons are flipped. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So we're like opposites or whatever.
Yeah. Spring in different hemispheres. That's cool. All right. So, okay. So you were born in New York in March 1995. And where did you grow up primarily?
I grew up mostly in New Rochelle, New York. I moved there when I was like 4, but I also spent time in Long Beach, but mostly in New Rochelle, New York.
Okay. Cool. And where is your family from?
My mom's from New York. She was born there and raised there. My dad's from Peru. He was born in Lima, and he was raised in Chosica. It's like a little like town in Lima, kind of like a little bit up from in the mountains, kind of. But yeah, and then he moved to the U.S. like when he was like 8, I think.
All right, great. So your mom from New York, your dad from Peru. And so would you share with me a little bit about your relationship to your Peruvian identity?
Well, I would always say that like I'm pretty well connected, thankfully, to my Peruvian side. My dad brought me to Peru when I was like 5 years old, and we stayed there for like a few weeks, and we visited Lima, we visited Cusco, and we visited Ayacucho. So that's the part where my dad's family's from. They're from Ayacucho. It's like up in the mountains, about like 14,000 feet high or whatever. And that's where my grandma was born and raised. So she grew up speaking like Quechua and being like in touch with like her indigenous like identity. So I was thankful to be raised by like my dad and my grandma, who were like very proud to be Peruvian. So growing up, they would always take me to like Peruvian events and like parties and concerts and stuff. So I have a close relationship with my Peruvian identity ever since I was like young, like 4 or 5 years old, I would say.
That's beautiful. I love hearing that you have that relationship to your Peruvian side. It sounds like your dad and your grandmother were really influential in that aspect. So you mentioned your grandmother was close to her indigenous roots, right?
Yes.
So could you expand a little bit then about what that experience was like, you know, growing up early and having this influence from your father and your grandmother?
Well, I guess growing up, I've been like very like connected to my indigenous roots. And it hasn't been like we go to Peru every year. Like we haven't been, you know, financially like good enough to do that. But like I've been to Peru twice in my life, when I was 5 and when I was 19. But being Peruvian in the New York area, you do have access to your community. There's a lot of Peruvians in New York, a lot of Peruvians in New Jersey. So like I had an uncle and aunts, cousins, like in Long Island in New Jersey, you know, so in New York City. So like like growing up, I was always like around that family, and my grandma, like she's very much, she has always been connected to the indigenous community, like in the US, ever since she moved here. She was an activist in Peru, and she was an activist here too. So she's always been about organizing and like, you know, providing for the community, doing work with homeless people and stuff. So I guess growing up, my grandma would consistently remind me, like, you know, ever since I was young, she would be like, we're Indigena, like we're Wadi from Peru, from Ayacucho, you know, and like, so I think that like her like constantly reminding me about who she is, and my dad about who he is, kind of just like, it kind of just made me like program it like into my bloodstream, like that I'm Peruvian and part indigenous. And it's not necessarily like we did like so many things to like prove being indigenous, but I guess one thing that we would constantly do growing up was go to powwows in New York City. So like powwows are like a mixed multicultural like indigenous celebration that like different nations and tribes will come together, dance, sing, like have food, barbecue, stuff like that. So my father was close friends with like a guy who did dancing at a powwow in New York City. And the guy who organized it, his name is Cliff Matias, and he's Quechua from Peru as well, but like raised in Brooklyn. So like I was just constantly surrounded by like my culture, like growing up ever since I was like 4 or 5. So it's like, it's hard for me to like separate like what it was growing up, because it's like all I've ever known, you know? So yeah, I guess that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, that's thank you so much for sharing that with me. And you know, your grandmother sounds like this powerful woman who you know, I think it sounds like she really established, you know, your roots early. And, you know, you also share how you had this relationship, you know, not just to the indigeneity in Peru, right, but also in the indigeneity in, you know, in the environment and the community that you grew up with in New York, you know, and I am grateful that you mentioned being on Lenape lands, because I think, you know, when I think of my own indigeneity, right, being someone from the Amazon, being from La Selva, I think the closer that I get to it, the closer that I find those connections, you know, in terms of indigeneity that I find here in, you know, like the Northern Americas, right? So your family, you say, is from Ayacucho, and you mentioned growing up in New York. So where are you currently?
I currently live in West Texas, like on Tigwa land.
I just wanted to get that. And so you know, it sounds like you grew up very closely connected to your roots. And so I don't want to assume, but you know, as you're describing this relationship to your Peruvian identity, I want to ask if it's meaningful for you to have this relationship or to maintain this relationship to Peru or to your Peruvian identity.
Yeah, I think you said, is it meaningful? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's like, I guess without that, I would not be an artist. So like my inspiration for my art, like my poetry and my music, it comes from there. So without like me being exposed to that culture from a young age, or like without me like loving that part of myself, then I wouldn't be an artist. So it's everything. It means everything.
Yeah, I've seen some of your work on your social media, and it's beautiful. Like the poetry that you write and the art that you create is really beautiful. And I just have to say that, you know, I'm grateful to be able to bear witness to your creativity and to that process, because I think, you know, I didn't grow up surrounded by many Peruvians, but I think that the more that I expand those connections, at least through social media, which has been a tool, at least for me, like the closer I feel to community, right? The closer I get to it. And so I'm grateful that you share your art with the rest of us. Can you expand a little bit more on the art that you do, on the work that you do?
Well, thanks for the love. Thanks for listening. So I do poetry. Like I've been doing slam poetry for almost like 4 years now. So I do competing in different poetry slams. In 2018, I got invited to the National Poetry Slam in Chicago, where I was able to represent a New York team. So the way it worked was that it was 75 teams from around the country, each team consisting of 4 to 5 poets. And I was representing my Westchester County, Silvernoy land. And so I got to go with 3 other poets. We took a plane to Chicago, and we participated in the National Poetry Slam, which happens once a year in a different part of the country. And it's basically just like a big competition where like some of the nation's top poets get together and compete against each other. So that was kind of like in August 2018, that was kind of like my like entrance through the doorway of performing, because before that I had only been performing for like a few months, and I just won a few poetry slams, and I ended up performing in Rockland County, upstate New York, and then in Massachusetts, like Springfield, 3 hours away. And so since then, I've kind of like grown to a different artist. So I would say I'm a poet before anything. And then I kind of got my foot into the musician, like doing music. So like doing hip hop music. And then I guess I've been doing music for like the last year or two. And I released my first musical project like on March 20th this year, like 3.5 months ago. So I've released like 8 songs since then. And I'm kind of just trying to be a full-time artist since COVID began, because I lost my job last year. I wasn't able to get another job. So I'm just like trying to be a full-time artist now. And it's been working like, for the last like year, I would say. I've been a successful full-time artist, but it's hard though. So yeah, like I do poetry, music. I'm trying to get into modeling more, like doing gender fluid, like photo shoots. I like to dress up femme and stuff. So I guess I'm evolving as an artist. So I'm always like doing different things. Like I want to publish a book. I want to publish paintings. I've done a lot of pieces on canvas, over 100. So like I'm just sitting on these paintings, trying to start a painting business. So I'm selling T-shirts now. So like I want to be like an all-around artist, like, you know, do every aspect of art, because I truly do love like every aspect of art. So that's who I'm trying to be.
Thank you for sharing, you know, all of the work that you've done and the work that you hope to do. I'm a big believer in manifestation, so I will manifest, you know, with you that you're able to become this full-time artist, like you said, right? I think that you named that COVID, affected your employment, and I, that's a reality. And I think that it sounds like, as you're speaking about, art, it sounds like this may be something that's also, sustaining you, and maybe able to sustain you, in a way that it sounds like other employment may not, right? And so I'm grateful that you shared your work with me. You also spoke of how Peru influences your art, right? And so I'm also curious as to, that piece, but also how the experience of living in the diaspora has affected your Peruvian identity in general.
So you're saying like, so that was two different questions, right? All right, wait. So could you repeat the first one?
Yeah. So if you could expand a little bit on, how Peru continues to influence your art, and then at large, how, living in the diaspora has affected your Peruvian identity. I don't know if there's a correlation there or not, but.
So I guess, well, like Peru, I guess Peru definitely like, and my culture definitely influences my art. I would say like most of my inspiration comes from like my father or my grandma. So like people who are Peruvian. And I don't like to say that like I credit it to Peru, because I think that like nationalism is like a little dangerous sometimes. Like, so I don't like, it's not like I rep everywhere I go, I'm Peruvian. I'm not like one of those people. And I guess growing up in the diaspora, what do you mean like the diaspora? Like you mean in the US kind of here, like away from Peru, right?
Yes. So
Oh,
growing up outside of Peru.
well, I think that like it's hard for me to connect with other Peruvians in the US sometimes because they could be assimilated, they could be like very colonized mindset. And it's not to say that all Peruvians are, but I find that a lot of immigrants too, they come to this country and they get comfortable. They get comfortable in white supremacy. They get comfortable in discrimination. They get comfortable in privilege. And oftentimes like they don't fight for, like the kids that are in cages, for the undocumented immigrants, So I think that the diaspora here in the US, not just Peruvian, but like all other like nations from like South America, it can be very complex because sometimes like my dad was undocumented in this country and my grandma was undocumented too. So there's that struggle and that pain that people can connect to, like amongst immigrants. But there are other immigrants here who came here so-called with papers, right? And they get comfortable and some of them are anti-immigrants and like don't feel any empathy for the kids in cages. So being part of the diaspora in the US is very complex, I think, like, because you're not validated as Peruvian when you go back there. You're not validated as an American here. Not like I want to be American, right? Like, I don't care. But I think that like there's no place for us here, especially like people who are immigrants that are indigenous too, because like we know our ancestral lands are in Peru, right? And we feel a connection to those places. But when we come here, we're in stolen land too. like occupied territories. So we have to, as indigenous people or mixed indigenous people in a different land from where you're from, we have a responsibility to speak up on indigenous issues here as well in this country. So I think being part of the diaspora means you have a responsibility. So especially if you're like a POC or an indigenous person, a Black person, a mixed Afro-Indigenous person, like you have a responsibility to uplift your community and support your community 100%. That means LGBTQ too. So like one thing about being Peruvian in the diaspora, like you probably dealt with it too, like homophobia, transphobia, queerphobia. That's a big part of Latinidad, right? That machismo. So like, I could be like, oh yeah, you my Peruvian brother, you my Peruvian sister, you my Peruvian sibling. But then once you find out about my sexuality or my gender identity, you're like, oh, no, chill. Like, so I really don't have too many Peruvian friends. So like, it's complicated, you know, being part of the diaspora, but it's also a responsibility too. So I guess that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, it does. And you named so many important pieces right there, right? You know, you started talking about, you know, this notion of nationalism, right? How it can be dangerous. And I've seen the ways, right, that like even within my family who are indigenous, right? This notion of Peruvian nationalism is what's fed to us first, right? It's what we're told we are first. And I grew up hearing my parents say, you know, you're Peruvian before anything else. And I think often, you know, that can, for indigenous folks, I think that can often take us away from, you know, being closer or establishing our indigenous roots, right? Because nationalism kind of forces us to align with a nation itself, right? And so you also named that even within the diaspora, right, there's different components that make it, it sounds like it makes it complex to navigate, right? Because there are layers in terms of how we are identifying outside of Peru, right? What it means to be indigenous outside of Peru, but also on stolen lands, right, here in the US. And then you also touch on what it means to then be queer, right? Or to have a queer identity, because it's true, right? And I think it goes back to how Peruvians see almost like what the ideal Peruvian is, right? Who is the ideal Peruvian? And it's usually, you know, a cishet, you know, white, light-skinned Peruvian, right? And we can, I think, attribute that back to a colonial mentality, right, that exists here in the US as well. And so you named...
Oh, you broke up for a sec.
Yeah.
You good?
Yeah, we're good. We're good. I think it's still recording, so fingers crossed. But yeah, I was just saying that you named really important pieces about what that means, right? And how we, I think, come to understand diaspora. And I think part of the reason, right, I'm also archiving these stories, right, why I wanted to speak to other folks is because these are the stories that I'm interested in, right? Like I'm sitting in academia in this institution, and I just didn't see our narratives, right? I didn't see narratives of queer and trans folks, and I didn't see narratives of folks who identified as Peruvian and the intersection of the two, right? And for me, at least, being queer and identifying as Peruvian is really central to how I navigate, you know, my life. And if it's all right with you, I would like to shift a little bit into actually talking about queerness. And so, can you speak to me a little bit about your queer identity?
Sure. So I guess I identify as a two-spirit, and I also identify as trans. So I identify as two-spirit to honor my Indigenous background. It's a term that's like used by Indigenous people exclusively to describe like people who are part of like our community. So being two-spirit can like, it can reflect your sexual orientation, or it can reflect your gender identity, or both. So for different Indigenous people, it'll mean different things. So, and the Quechua term for two-spirit is Kariwadami. So I identify as two-spirit Kariwadami, and I also identify as trans. So I identify as trans because it makes me feel like, I guess, comfortable with who I am, because I always known that like I'm not really like a cisgender man. So like I've used different pronouns in the past before. Like currently I like they, them, but like I'm feeling like I might move more towards she or her, or just she and they. But yeah, that, I guess that's a bit, that covers a bit about like who I am, I guess.
Yeah, and you know, I hear you saying that two spirit and trans both um, both feel like they are in alignment with you, right? And I think that in honoring, you know, with two spirit, honoring your indigenous roots, right? But then also trans, it sounds like, you know, as you're speaking, you're also describing something that I feel holds true to queerness, and that it's not a linear process, right? I think that it's something that is constantly evolving as we evolve, as we shift within our identities. And so I guess, what does queerness mean to you then?
Queerness. I've never like identified as queer, but I guess I would fall under that like identity. Because I know it's very like being queer is very like what's the word? It's a very broad term, like you know. So how would I define queerness? I guess that'd be a hard question, you know, because like all these labels and identities were created to like separate us, I guess, which is not a bad thing sometimes, but like I used to identify as bi, then I identified as just gay, and then I started to like feel close to non-binary, and now I'm at the point in my life where I identify as two-spirit and trans. So like I guess being queer is kind of like a journey. Like you said, like I guess I would define queerness like as being othered just because you're different, like, you know, so like that's really what it is. Like we're just different and we're othered, and like that's, we're othered because we're different, like, you know. So I think that queer people are, I think people in our community, like a lot of them have like healing powers. So if we were in our ancient societies pre-colonization, we would be like sacred medicine people that would be like the healers of our community. We would be like the shamans. We would be like the priests of our community, like providing healing, being herbsmen and herbswomen, herbs people, you know. So like being the guide, the spiritual person, the clairvoyant, like that's what queerness is. Like we're spiritual people, whether we know it or not. Like our existence is like is spiritual. So I guess that's what I would say what queerness is.
Yeah, thank you so much. That, you know, you're touching on when you said, you know, that queer folks, you know, are healers, right? And these pre-colonial times we would have been so sacred, or, you know, regarded as so sacred. Like I was getting chills. And I believe that as well. And I think that you also mentioned, you know, queerness as being othered, right, or different. And I think that part of the reason why, even on the recruitment material, right, on the flyer that I posted on Instagram, I intended for it to say, you know, like folks who self-identify, because you named that, you know, queer is so broad, right? And it can be an umbrella term that encompasses multiple identities, right? It encompasses so many ways of moving through the world. And so I think that was also, you know, like an extension for folks to be able to reach out if it felt like something that aligned with them as well, you know. And so, you know, you touching on queerness, it sounds like there's these two parts to it, right? So this being other, this being different, and then you're also thinking about this in terms of notions of our indigeneity, right? So you touched a little bit on community. Do you think you have found a queer community?
No, definitely not. I've never felt safe in like LGBTQ spaces. Mainly because a lot of the ones that I've been in, like they're too white. So I'm sure like you probably experienced that too. Like you go to a pride parade or a pride event, it's like 95% white people. So it's like LGBTQ representation is not representation until we have Black and Indigenous people at the front of the movement. And I just haven't seen that happen. So I have not found my own community. All the trans and queer people I know are like on IG. You know, we talk in the DM, but like we've never met in person. I know so many trans people that I've never met. And I know so many Two-Spirit people that I've never met. And that's just because like, I guess the pandemic too, like the last year, like I haven't hung out with anyone. But I'm also an introvert too. So like I could care less about having a community. I could care less about going out. Like I don't really feel comfortable in most big social gatherings. I used to go to a lot of shows to perform before the pandemic started. Like 4 times a week, 5 times a week, I would be at a show performing. I started like this journey of being a full-time artist before the pandemic. Like I was performing for like probably 2 years straight from like 2018 until February 2020 when the pandemic started. Like I was doing a whole 2 years straight. So like, but during that time, it was mostly cisgender performing spaces where I was just trying to get a poem in an open mic while I would do one piece. So I've been to a few LGBTQ events. So first off, there's not enough. And second off, there's too many white dominated LGBTQ spaces. So like maybe one day I'll find that community, you know. I've been to a drag show. I wasn't really feeling it. Didn't really like the dynamics of like the host that was hosting the show, who was a cisgender gay man. So like I've been to different spaces and I just haven't felt comfortable in any of them. So I don't know if that's because of my social battery. I can't do the big events really. Or if it's because like I have a problem with each of these spaces personally. So my cats are just running around. Yeah, so like I wouldn't say I found like a community yet, but I have found one online. And I found a lot of people online. So I'll take that, you know, I'll take that win and just keep that there.
Yeah, I have experienced exactly what you're naming in terms of I don't know. I'm going to speak from my experience, but I think that when I'm in queer spaces, I feel like no matter how inclusive they want to be, you still feel the whiteness there, right?
Yeah.
I always feel that. And it's, I think, I don't know if, you know, if other folks who identify as, you know, as Indigenous, but are read as white, if they experience that, but there's still a difference there, right? It's almost like when folks see me, I'm very high femme and I'm bi, and so it almost feels like all of it is erased, right? When I'm in those spaces, and you would imagine that you would feel better in those spaces sometimes. And so I hear you. There's almost a sense of discomfort, of unease, at least for me. And you also named that you found a community through social media. Would you like to expand a little bit about what that process has been like of finding folks online?
Well, yeah, I guess like I posted my first poem that had to do with my gender identity, like probably like a year and a half ago or something. And it was a poem about like my gender and my sexuality, like being bullied when I was young because of that. So after I released that poem, I just got mad love. And I was kind of like, okay, right? And I never even came out to my parents. They found the video on YouTube. So it was so awkward when like they saw it. My dad was like, "Oh, you released a new poem on YouTube, right?" Because he subscribed to me. I forgot. And then he ended up showing it to my mom and my bro in the living room, like, "Hey, let's all watch it on the phone." And I was just like, "Yikes!" So that's the coming out story to my fam, I guess. But it was that poem that I released on my Instagram. I put it on TikTok and YouTube. And I didn't want my parents to see it. Truly, I didn't want to have that convo because it's awkward, you know? Like I've heard like my parents say homophobic, transphobic things during my upbringing. So it just made me like not want to come out to them. But after I released that poem, a lot of two-spirit people started messaging me and like saying, wow, your poem, like it really hit, or like your poem, like I loved your poem. And I would say that's the poem that kind of got my foot into the door, like on social media, because a lot of people started sharing it. It was like one of my first videos to blow up or whatever. So, and I didn't think it would. I didn't think it would blow up. I didn't think people would even like it. So I kind of went out like on the rim and just put it out there. And it felt good after I put it out there because I was just getting a lot of love from people like on Instagram and TikTok. And from there, my friend group, like in that community, in the two-spirit community specifically, like has grown a lot. So it's been nice, you know, like to receive that love after releasing poetry. But that's how like I got connected to the community online, is from putting my work out there, kind of like not knowing if it would be heard, but it did. So yeah, there's to releasing vulnerable poems out there.
Yeah, so you know, you named that this poem, right, in a way brought you closer. It sounds like it brought you closer to community, right? Even if that community is online and virtually. I really do see the value in I think these virtual intimacies that are created, right? Especially during the pandemic. And you also touched on, you know, your family seeing the video, and it makes me think of, you know, what what it means for us to share something that is so vulnerable, right? So personal in terms of not just identity, but like when we think of sharing our authentic self with people, right? Like it makes me think of how, like, do we have a say in who we get to do that, right? And how important it is, I think, for us to be able to be mindful in terms of what our boundaries are, right? Of who gets to see us fully. And, I'm curious what it means for you then to simultaneously identify as, as two-spirit, trans, and also, holding your Indigenous Peruvian identities.
Well, to claim being two-spirit is honoring that Indigenous identity, because, when the white man came to this land, he saw feminine men and masculine women and was like, we got to get rid of that, So claiming to be two-spirit, Kadiwani, from an indigenous part of Peru, I think is like a beautiful thing, because they're interconnected, There's no Peru, there's no Peruvianness without Kadiwani people. So I guess you can't separate those two in my eyes. Some people might want to because of their colonized mindset, but they're intertwined. So I guess, does that answer part of your question? Was there like another part of your question?
No, that answers it. And I guess I'm just curious if then you feel your identities are coexisting in the same spaces that you navigate.
Coexisting. Yeah, I would say they coexist. Like, I think that certain people who are indigenous, they just like identify as two-spirit, right? So not all two-spirit people are also trans, right? Like, I identify as trans because I that term fits me. But a lot of two-spirit people, they don't claim any other identities because the two-spirit identity was made specifically for indigenous people because of the anti-indigenous, like, feelings that people felt in the LGBTQ community. Like we said, whitewashed, colonized, right? So I think, like, in different spaces, I'm trans. In other spaces, I'm two-spirit. Like, I can be both and I can just be one, So, like, I think my identity is like fluid, Sometimes I'll dress up like this or like that. And I think that, like, but you can have multiple identities though, like in one space. And I feel like it fits me. Just like people come to this country like you or me, and we have an indigenous parent, right? That's from Peru, right? So we're Peruvian and we're indigenous, but we cross the border and we're called Latino, right? And immigrant, right? So, like, there's so many labels that we give ourselves when it comes to ethnicity and race, that when it comes to gender identity too, we can claim multiple things as well, right? We can be non-binary and trans at the same time. I can be two-spirit and trans at the same time. So, like, I think that we have the right to claim multiple identities. And I think it's a cool thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bobby. You sharing about how you navigate these different spaces, right? And what your identities come to mean in them. It also, points to how our identities are so relational, right? Like, even in who we're around, who is going to perceive us, right? Those perceptions are also influencing the ways that we see ourselves, I feel. And even you saying, right, like we're, yes, we were born, in this nation state of Peru, and yet we have, indigenous, parents, and then we cross the border here, and then suddenly we're Latinx, right? And even that, I think I struggle sometimes with holding that, right? That people are perceiving me as Latina when at least personally, I've seen the ways that Latinidad just erases my indigeneity, right? And so thank you so much for sharing. And it also, this might be a big question, but it's something that I think about and I ask folks about because not hearing our stories, knowing that queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, people of color have been historically erased. And it also makes me think about what's actually happening in the present, right? In terms of our bodies are often, targets of violence, of harm. Many of us often experience it, right? Not just in Peru or in in the US, but like globally. And I think that we face disproportionate amounts of harm and violence. And so my question to you then is, how do we move knowing that this is an occurrence, right, in the present, that we've been historically erased? So how do we move then after we experience this pain, right? How do we survive through these moments?
It's a good question. How do we move? I guess, well, I think I think about what you're saying all the time, that like people in our community, they face like discrimination and hate. But yeah, I guess I'm reminded about that every single day because I get hateful comments on my poetry videos or on my music videos, like every day on TikTok and sometimes on Instagram. So like, I guess like I'm reminded of that every day, like online, and when I go like to the gym or whatever, like I'm reminded of it by how people look at me sometimes, So like I'll dress like super femme at the gym or whatever, like short shorts, like little top or whatever. But it doesn't make me stop who I'm like gonna be. I can't like put my life on pause just to make cisgender people comfortable. So I think like I read this tweet once or something. It was like, just know that every time a trans woman steps out of her house, that she's like, that's a revolutionary act. So I thought that was a really beautiful tweet. I don't know who said it, but I think it's true, like every time we step outside, like we might get hate or shade from other people, but I think that a lot of people love us openly and in the closet. There's people who love us that are DL or whatever, and so like I think navigating like who you are and stepping outside every day is a revolutionary act. So just like remind yourself of that, that like that you're making your ancestors proud, because we always have ancestors that are queer or were trans or two-spirit, wherever they came from, whatever continent, no matter if you're indigenous, African, European, like we're all over the place throughout history. So wherever you stand and go outside and be your true self, you're making your ancestors proud, whether you know it or not. So I think like that's a cool thing. And that like, you just got to keep being yourself. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really sitting with what you've shared, and really holding it, right? Because even you naming this this constant reminder every day. You're out here putting yourself, right, like out there, and I think it truly, even that, right, and I'm going to say that when I see you do that, right, it truly is a revolutionary act. And I sit in deep gratitude when all the folks that I have sat with and I have spoken to are able to and willing to speak to me, about their experiences. It really is, and it's a powerful way that we move, right? It's a powerful way that we move through this world. It's how we, I think, also move beyond just survival, right? Like to go out there and to show our full authentic selves. And so, you've touched a bit about your, two-spirit, trans, Indigenous identities. And I wonder if there are any other identities that are salient to you that you would like to share in this moment.
I think that's it pretty much. Like I identify as two-spirit and trans, sometimes Peruvian. I identify like as a mixed Indigenous person. And that's pretty much it. Those are like my labels, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. And so, just to give you a little bit of background of myself, I do healing work that centers queer, trans, Black, Indigenous people of color. So I've been trained in Black feminist methods, in the tenets of healing justice. So as I move through my work, right, and just in general, as I move through my life, I get really curious as to how folks center wellness and how they view or how they are healing. And so the next few questions are going to focus a little bit more on those aspects, if that's all right with you.
Sounds good.
Okay, so what does wellness look like for you?
Wellness for me, I would say probably making sure that I relax enough every single day, and not overwork myself. I think wellness for me has been not having to set my expectations too high or my goals too unachievable. I'm not a person too much that kind of puts a lot of planning into work. I kind of just act. And, if I'm going to write a poem today, it comes out and I'm done with the poem. But wellness for me is kind of just taking it day by day and not getting too concerned with the future, living in the present. So wellness is making your own meals at home. Wellness is drinking enough water per day. Wellness is personally making sure I shower every morning, and make sure I'm clean. Wellness is dressing up nice for myself, just to look beautiful for myself. Wellness is having a clean space to live in. So wellness is going to the gym for me. Wellness is going outside and taking a fresh breath of air. Wellness is a lot of different things for me. So I think it can be different for every person, but for me personally, it's all of those things. Yeah, I would say, I think I covered it all.
Yeah. A lot of factors, right, in wellness, naming, physical, mental, spiritual wellness, and you're naming relaxing, so that to the point of not overworking yourself, right? And I think that rest is so important, right? It's how we move sustainably, and we don't have to earn that rest too, right? We are able to rest when we need it. And you saying stepping outside to get a breath of fresh air. Well, I have to do that today. Um, so what about healing then? What does healing look like for you?
Healing, I think talking like has a lot of healing powers. You know, I'm a poet, so I've written poems that like I felt like did a lot of healing for me after I was done writing it or after I was done performing it or whatever. So, but also having someone to talk to, whether that's like your partner, a family member, a friend, a therapist. Um, I've been wanting to go to a therapist for the past few years, but I'm truly scared that because there's a lot of therapists who are transphobic and homophobic. So I've heard about trans people going to therapy and they just come out worse than when they went in because the therapist thinks that they're sick or they have a disease. So I would like to get a therapist one day, but I want it to be like a trans therapist or like a two-spirit therapist because I don't want to have that negative energy like thrown back at me when I'm trying to heal. So I think if you don't have a therapist, you can talk to someone, whether that's like your close friend or family or your partner. So I think there's a lot of healing like in speaking and being honest about your own emotions. So I think besides speaking and talking about your emotions, I think other ways of healing could be like, I don't know, people have a lot of different ways of healing, but like get into being spiritual, and that could mean different things. But I think for me, healing is like thinking about people that I've lost, like in my family, people who have passed away. I think like just remembering them can like be healing, or thinking about them can be have healing powers. And I think that's like emotionally, like mentally healing for me. Physically healing, like I have had to do quite a bit of physical healing in my life because I had some surgeries on my leg. So I had 2 surgeries on my leg, like before I turned 18, on my knee. And like I had to relearn how to walk like 2 separate times. So like healing for me too is really like I did a lot of meditating, like when I was like in high school. So like many people, they have like this high school experience in their junior and senior year where like they're super social and like have lots of friends. That was not me. That was 2 years of physical therapy for me, not having any friends because I could barely walk. I had crutches for months, both times when I had the surgery. So like healing for me is deeply like meditational and like visualization, picturing yourself healing. Because I did that a lot. I would visualize myself walking again, or I would visualize myself like maybe being better and stronger and having more muscle in my legs. So healing physically for me is a lot about visualization, meditation, closing your eyes, clearing your mind. Um, and then like mentally, emotionally healing, I think it's good to talk and be present and like talk to other people, be honest, to do a little writing, journal, whatever, poetry. Um, and I think any of the arts too, like can have healing powers, like whether it's painting, drawing, dancing, singing, like all of these artistic like things have healing powers too. So I guess that's my thoughts on healing.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Bobby. You know, I'm also hearing the different layers that healing can include, right? From your body, your mind, your spirit, and I also want to validate your fears surrounding seeking therapy, right? Because my previous background was in a counseling, so like counseling psych, and I a lot of what that was also thinking about how many therapists aren't culturally mindful, and don't have knowledge in terms of a liberation approach, right? And so I want to validate those fears because they are real, and I've heard of folks seeking therapy, trans folks, queer folks seeking therapy, and and being harmed. And I think that's something that's not often named. Um, and so in whatever that journey ends up being for you, I hope that it brings you what it is that you are needing. Um,
Thank you.
and also, you're naming, remembering loved ones. It makes me think of my great grandmother, who's not in this physical plane, right? But like who's here with me everywhere, right? She always wants to be the center of attention, but I always feel her around, right? And that I think you naming that it is right. It is so important in healing physically, and I love you naming this visualization, right? This meditation of seeing yourself as healing, right? And what that process looks like, because it's also not a linear process, I feel, right? It's an ongoing journey itself. And so I'm also curious about pleasure, if that comes up for you at all when you think of your identities or how you move through life.
Pleasure. I guess, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of like joy and pleasure in my life, you know. I take a lot of time for myself every day to just like be be in a nice, like friendly space. Did I cut out for a sec or not? So I try to enjoy every day and like have fun. I'm a very like fun, outgoing person. So like I like to laugh and make jokes or whatever. So um, pleasure is definitely part of my everyday life, you know, like um, I have like cats or whatever. So I like to play with the cats, like a little toy or something. I like to watch like TV shows on Netflix. Um, so I don't think you have to do a lot every day to like have pleasure, you know, find something that you like and just dive into it for an hour or two, you know, and that will give you pleasure. But I'm trying to think of like what is one of the most pleasurable things for me. I think I really like to braid my hair. Um, I like to braid my hair and like put earrings on and like put on a dress or something. Like that's one of the funnest things that I like to do. Like I almost play dress up like every day. um, and I like to put earrings on, maybe a little makeup. Um, those are like some of my most pleasurable things that I do. And I also like I have a lot of fun at the gym. I mean, I told you about my surgeries on my legs. So I used to be like a hardcore athlete. Like in high school, I played soccer, and then I had two injuries that like left me unable to play. So in my junior and senior year, I started like having to like work out and do a lot of physical therapy. So ever since I was like 18, I've like gone to the gym, and because my doctor told me, like, he was like, if you don't take care of your legs, you're going to get arthritis like by age 30. Cause, you know, not many people get two knee surgeries. Like like at this young of an age. So like, I was like, I gotta go to the gym. I gotta stay strong. So like being like in the gym and working out on my legs, making sure that they're strong, like, and that gives me a lot of pleasure too. So, because I remember when I could barely walk, and like over the last 5 years, like I've been able to lift like a lot of weight, and I feel like a lot stronger than I did in the past. So that's something that I guess gives me pleasure.
I love hearing about all these different ways that you find pleasure in your life. And I don't know if you're familiar with Adrienne Marie Brown, but you know, they're a writer, and they often talk about pleasure. And something that always sticks out to me is they said, you know, can we think of pleasure as a basic need, right? As something as similar as you know, needing you know, food and water and a safe place, you know, to rest. Can we also think of pleasure in that way? And so I love asking folks, you know, how they find pleasure in their life, or how they view pleasure. And, you know, and again, you naming, you know, the physical aspects of taking care of your body, you know, after these major surgeries. And, you know, I also appreciate you saying that we don't have to look very far, right, to be able to find pleasure in our life. I think we can find it, right, in small ways and intangible ways. And I love that dressing up for you is pleasurable, because I think that it is, right? I think that, I mean, you know, being like high femme, like I take that, so that is pleasurable for me as well. And so I'm glad that you named it, because I think that sometimes people don't understand like what goes into that process, right? And what that may mean for each person. Braiding your hair, right? Putting makeup and earrings on, that's so important. And I think also, and like, I don't know if you've heard this, but at least for me, when I was growing up, my great grandmother, my mom Edith, would always say that, you know, Indigenous people shouldn't let other people touch their hair, because hair carries our like energy, right? And I just, you know, and you saying that you braid your hair, I know that for me, when I start to feel a little scattered, I always have my hairbrush with me, and I'm like brushing my hair, and there's something about that process as well, right? That brings me pleasure. So thank you for sharing that with me. And I only have, you know, two more questions before we wrap. But one of them is, what do you wish for yourself?
What do I wish for myself? I guess, well, I wish for myself that like, that I can live in a space where I can be connected to nature, like very closely, whether that's in like the forest or the desert somewhere, or somewhere near the mountains and trees where I can go outside every day and be connected to nature. That's kind of like my goal, like to live in a place like that. Like my grandma always talked to me about how she lived in the chacras de Peru, like, and like, you know, that she would like grow food or whatever and like wash her clothes in the river or some shit. And so like, I want to be like there, you know, like I want to be by the river, by the mountains, in nature. I want to have some cows and chickens, maybe goats, maybe some llamas. I don't know. Like that's kind of where I would want to be, to grow like my own food and like be able to sustain myself off that food. That's kind of like where I would want to be. Like I wanna be connected to the land and to the way that like some of my ancestors like used to live. That's kind of what I wish for myself. And I want to move to Peru. Like in the next 5 years, I want to learn Quechua like fully, and I want to I want to live in Ayacucho. I want to live in Chosica, the places where my dad and my grandma used to live. So I think slowly but surely I'll move there and kind of be the person that the reconnecting person that I've always wanted to be. So.
I love that. And you mentioned you're visualizing and you're meditating on that. And so like, when you named healing practices, and I named that I'm big on manifestation. So I will visualize and manifest this for you. I really, really hope that, you're able to to move to Peru within the next 5 years, to have your chakra, right, to be connected to the land. I really wish that for you as well. And my last question, so what about for queer Peruvians, right? Those who self-identify as such, what do you wish for them, for us?
You're saying for queer Peruvians? Yeah. So I guess, I wish that you could find someone that you can be comfortable with 100%, like fully, because I guess I wasn't comfortable with my own identity until I found a partner that also was comfortable with their identity. So it's been like, ever since like I found like my partner, like I think I've like been able to like grow like to who I want to be and who I've always known that I am. So I think like whether it's a friend or a partner, I think finding one person that like can relate to you, to your own identities. So like my partner is Indigenous and Two-Spirit as well, and trans. So like we've been able to like really like relate to each other. And I think that not everyone has to find a friend or partner, but I think a lot of cases like queer and trans people, when they find a friend or two friends that they really like can vibe with, it can do a lot for them. It can do a lot to boost your energy, your mental health, your drive, So I think many people who are like LGBTQ, like they struggle with mental health, like whether it's depression or anxiety. And a lot of that has to do with like the way we were treated when we were young. So I think like it's great to find someone that can relate to you and see you for who you are and appreciate you for who you are. So that's the advice I would give like to other queer or trans Peruvians, like find that one friend that you can feel comfortable with, like dressing how you want to dress and talking how you want to talk, because that can do a lot for you and your own confidence and your own self-acceptance. So, yeah.
Yeah, those connections, right? How they those sacred connections, right? That nourish us, that nurture us, and it's beautiful to hear that with your partner you've been able to it sounds like you've been able to come in deeper alignment with yourself, right? Together, being able to do that together. That's really beautiful. And I, Bobby, like I'm really, really grateful that you reached out, that you expressed an interest in this project, and that we found each other on social media. And I don't take it lightly. I always tell folks, and it's true, but I sit in deep gratitude at the end of every single one of these interviews, because I value those connections, right? I value being able to hear people's stories. I think that they are important, as you named, earlier, speaking to someone, but even in the exchange, right, of sacred storytelling, I think is really, really important. So thank you so much.
Of course, thank you for doing the project. when I read about it, like I saw the Instagram post, I think. I don't know who posted about it, but someone was like, hey, are you interested? Like email this email. And someone forwarded it to me and was like, hey, like you should apply for this. And so I emailed you, found out a little bit more about it. And yeah, I don't think there's other people doing the work that you're doing right now. So like there might be someone out there studying queer Mexican identity, queer Chicano identity. Maybe there's someone out there studying like queer Puerto Rican identity, but there's less Peruvians in this country than other like communities. So like, and I think even like with the new president in Peru, it's good, but like he's kind of transphobic, homophobic. Like he said some things in public. So like we got to keep talking about it. And like being Peruvian and queer is like a beautiful thing. So like I think more people just need to like normalize us talking about ourselves and taking space. So appreciate you too.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I mentioned earlier, right? I wasn't seeing us anywhere, and it was something that hurts, right? Because it's like you feel the erasure. It's a historical erasure that's happened, and I know that we're out there, right? Like I've seen it even within my own connections that I formed online, and so I'm just hoping, like I really believe in the power of storytelling. I really think it's a radical act to be able to share, one story. And so I'm really grateful, and I have found so many folks and have been connected with so many folks. And each one touches me differently, nourishes me differently. And I'm so grateful. But those are all the questions that I have. Is there anything else that you wish to share with me before we wrap?
I think I'm good.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Cool.